Yeah, so I'm thinking about the greatest, the greatest songs of all time, the greatest books of all time. I don't know if you've ever done a little research on what are the greatest books of all time. You can look it up on a Google search, and you have all kinds of weird answers. But if you go to certain specific like publishing houses, they have their vision. I'm assuming it's the books they publish. So Random House has their top, 22 books you should read before you die, or greatest books ever written. On there are books like Pride and Prejudice, which, sure, one of the greatest books, I guess, ever written. Brothers Karamazov, that's probably definitely on the list. The Fellowship of the Rings, good one. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. These are all books that you'll find in most lists if you're like top 100. If you go to a place like Goodreads, which is more, people are kind of putting in their opinions, books show up like 1984, Animal Farm, To Kill a Mockingbird. These books you probably read in high school, or maybe, or were supposed to read in high school. The Great Gatsby, Frankenstein. All these books show up as on a lot of lists. A lot of the ones that probably should be on there are missing, but it depends on what site you go to and who's making the list. I'm not so much, I just because I like that kind of stuff, I can think hours and hours about like what's the greatest books of all time. I know most people don't care, but I do think you'll care about this. If I were to ask you what are the greatest books of the Bible, like which books of the Bible should you not only read but reread before you die, I would say at least 5. This is my list, so if you have a problem with my list, come talk to me. And we can have a debate about it. But number 1, the book of Genesis. I consider it one of the greatest books ever written. But in the Bible, it's one of those ones before you die, you should not just read it, but reread it. The book of the Psalms, which is really a song book, is one that should be reread over and over again in our life and in different parts of our lives. The book of Isaiah is probably one of the greatest books ever written for a number of reasons, which I won't go into. And then 2 in the New Testament stand out, in my opinion, and that is the book of Romans, which I'm considering doing like a sermon series on this book, kind of a reimagination of the book of Romans. And then the book that we're going to be looking at over the next 7 weeks, the book of John. So to me, those 5 books are the books that you should reread and reread before you die. In other words, they should just be a part and a pattern in your life. The other books are great as well, but I'm just saying those are my top 5. And that leads us to the book that we're going to be looking at today, which is the book of John. Now, before I kind of break down the book of John, I want to make mention of that little picture in your worship guide that I have. I don't know how well you can see it because it's small, but I think we have it on the screens. There's the centerpiece of it. This is a piece of art by a French artist named Cassandra, and I believe this artist is still alive. I don't think this artist, he's not dead yet, I don't not believe, but he was born in 1932, and this painting was created in the 1980s, I believe. But this is a great picture that will serve as kind of like a visual interpretation of what we're going to be talking about in the book of John over the next 7 weeks. There's a lot happening in this picture, and it's actually 9 feet. Like if it's unfolded, it's like in panels. It's actually 9 feet long, and the parts you're missing are there's like trees and there's some like wheat field kind of vision down below. You can't really see that, or you can see the wheat a little bit. But that middle section is the highlight of the focus, obviously. And so I just want to point a couple of things out to you. One, this is an artistic representation of Jesus, and if you can see, he's like holding a lamb as the good shepherd. And he's standing in the river of life. If you see his feet are like in the water, he's standing in the river of life, and he is the center of the picture inside the tree of life itself. So the title of this is The Burning Bush, which is another symbol of everything happening here. So Jesus is the good shepherd standing in the river of life as the tree of life. The branches are going out from him. And then these 12 angels represent the 12 gates of the book of Revelation. So now we're thinking of like new creation. You have the lion and the lamb in the center too, because that is an illustration that comes from the book of Isaiah of what happens when the good shepherd brings peace to the world. The lion will lay down with the lamb. So you have this lion and lamb representing the peace that has come to the world. So there's a lot going on here, but as it relates to the book of John, there's 7 times in the book of John that Jesus uses an I am statement. And 2 of them are represented here in this picture. I am the good shepherd, obviously, as he's holding this lamb. And then, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm trying to see if I can see it from there. But above his head, like the door frame, there's some writing. It's in French. It's a French artist. And then below, there's some more writing. And that is a quote from the book of John chapter 10. And it's the quote, I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. So that's what's written in French on the top and the bottom. And so this is at least an entry point into the book of John for us, especially as we're going to be talking about the 7 signs that help reveal the glory of Christ. And so we're talking in symbols and pictures, and this artist is doing a great job, I think, of representing some of the symbolic overflow of what we're going to be looking at in the text. So we even have a more modernized kind of vision, kind of logo version of this that we'll be putting out too. Thank you, Jen. But I want you to see that's the original that we're playing off of with all its symbolism and this quote from the book of John. Now I want you to think about the book of John with me. So the book of John, you can kind of break it down into kind of like 5 parts. You have an introduction, John chapter 1. You guys remember the famous introduction? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay, you remember that? That's a pretty famous line in the Bible. It's really famous because it's the second time it kind of shows up. John 1:1, in the beginning, what does that remind you of in the Hebrew Scriptures? Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So John is doing that intentionally. He's signaling a new beginning. And so he's playing off Genesis in the beginning to say now, in the beginning, we have a new creation, something new is happening. And he's mirroring it off of Genesis 1:1. So chapter 1 of John is the introduction. And then you get to chapter 2, all the way through chapter 12, and John is going to be using all kinds of signs to help us to see something really important. He doesn't really specifically tell us what that is till the very end of the book. And I want you to see that. So if you have a Bible, you can look at John chapter 20 and verse 30. And John tells us why he writes what I consider to be one of the greatest books ever written. Okay? Because you can reread this book over and over and over again, and it's like splunking. You just go deeper and deeper. And you find all kinds of treasures each time. So why did John write this incredible book? This is what he says in John 20:30. Now Jesus did many signs in the presence of his disciples, which is not written in this book. So John's going to choose very carefully a few signs to focus on, even though there were so many that Jesus did that he couldn't write them all down. So he had to choose a few signs in particular. And then he says this is why he did it, verse 31. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. So that's why he writes the way he writes. And that's why he chooses the signs he chooses, so that in seeing this sign, we can come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, and that by faith in him, we can have life in him. So that's John's purpose for writing. So in John chapter 2 through 12, he's going to share at least 7 signs with us. And that's what we're going to look at in the next 7 weeks. We're going to look at one sign each week. 7 signs that will help our hearts cling to Jesus in faith so we can engage in the beauty and power and glory of his life. So 7 signs. There's probably more. There's different, scholarly and, opinions on how many signs are going on here, but I think that John loves playing off the number 7 because he does it a lot. And I think there's at least 7 signs that we can focus on to see the glory of Christ. And then when he gets to chapter 13 to 17, we have the final words of Jesus, and then chapters 18 to 20, the final work of Jesus, his arrest, his trial, his death, his resurrection, and then chapter 21 is the epilogue. So this is how the book works. So you know that when you read a book, if it's not a work of, if it's not just like a story, if it's actually broken down in a specific way, you go to the front page and you look at the table of contents, right? And you kind of see, okay, what's the framework that the writer is using to craft this story or these ideas? And so that's what I want you to see. I want you to see the framework he's using. So we're going to spend the next 7 weeks hanging out in this beginning section where he's dealing with the signs of Jesus' glory. So these signs, there's 7 of them, and they kind of work like clues. One famous scholar that I love, N.T. Wright, I mention him a lot, but he said the Gospel of John is planned as a kind of treasure hunt with careful and sometimes cryptic clues laid for us to follow. So what happens is John is going to show us, he's going to tell us a story, and the story serves as a sign, and this sign kind of is like, it's like pulling the curtain back to see the glory of Jesus and then shutting again. Because the reality is heaven and earth have not come together, but that's the ultimate vision of the Scriptures. In the book of Revelation, you see heaven and earth finally coming together once and for all. And so what Jesus is doing is he's inaugurating this new creation reality in himself. And so what he's going to allow us to do in these signs is it's like pulling back the curtain, and we, just for a moment, we get to see what it looks like when heaven and earth come together. Boom, ooh, we're like, whoa, and then the curtain shuts. We're like, wasn't that amazing? That was awesome. What did it mean? I don't know, but it was amazing. That's kind of what's happening with each of these signs. And so the first one is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And it's when Jesus turns water into wine. It's the first sign where Jesus allows us to see the curtain is pulled back and we get a glimpse of his glory, and then it's shut again. And then they go back to ordinary life. So I want you to see this beautiful story in John chapter 2. Here's what it says. This is the first sign of the glory of Jesus. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now, I'm gonna read, and I'm gonna make some notes here for you. Okay, there's so much going on here, and I only have so much time. Okay, first thing. There's some things I'm going to have to skip over, but this one I can't. The mother of Jesus. There's only 2 times, only 2 narrations in the book of John where the mother of Jesus is featured in a small way. Only twice. Here's the first one. And notice her name isn't mentioned. John never mentions her name. He just calls her the mother of Jesus. She's mentioned here in this story, and she's mentioned at the crucifixion when Jesus is dying. That's it. Now that's important. Anything John does, by the way, in his literary framework matters. So he mentions the mother of Jesus twice. The first sign of the glory of Jesus and at the crucifixion. So keep that in the back of your mind because that's important. It says Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. So this is a Jewish wedding. You need to understand Jewish weddings are not like our weddings. In this ancient time, a Jewish wedding was a more robust celebration that could last up to a week. So it's kind of like those destination weddings where you go to I don't know, Aruba. I've just thrown that out there. I have no idea. You go to Aruba and you take everybody with you. Do you know what I'm talking about? You take everybody, the bride and groom, obviously, but then the parents and the relatives and your, what do you call the people that stand up next to you? Bridesmaids. Thank you. Those people, you take everybody with you, and you just kind of have a little vacation with everybody you love for a lengthier period of time. That's kind of what's happening in this Jewish ancient culture. These weddings are a celebration of all the friends and family, and we're not sure how Mary and Jesus were connected to this group. John doesn't tell us. But it seems likely that Mary was not only invited, but maybe even had some responsibility because she notices when the wine, is no more. And then Jesus and his disciples, which at this point there might have only been like 5 of them with him, so it might have been Jesus and 5 other of the disciples that are invited because they're part of the broader family to this wedding. So it says in verse 3, when the wine had gone out. Now, when you say that in a Jewish wedding context, I don't think you're feeling the weight of it because you didn't go, okay, so if you were Jewish and you understood what's happening here culturally, when I said the wine had gone out and the wedding's not over yet, you would have been, so let's try that. When the wine had gone out, very good. You guys know the scriptures so well, you just react appropriately. It says, when the wine had gone out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Now, who's she talking to? Jesus. Yeah, she's talking to Jesus. They have no wine. And Jesus says to her, I love this, woman, what concern is that to you and to me? Now, let me explain something. Jesus is not being rude here. He is being abrupt, but he's not being rude. We don't actually know how to best translate from the Greek, this woman, because that's not actually the right translation. In our culture, that sounds like, if I were to say to you, woman, you'd probably be like, hello, like I wouldn't do that. And Jesus isn't being unkind. He's still being courteous, but he's being abrupt. Many scholars have tried to figure out the best translation, and I don't think anybody has a good one. They've tried lady and other things. Lady? It's still not the same. The key thing that John wants you to see is that he does not call her mother. He refers to her courteously, but abruptly. What does this have to do with me? Now, there's a reason he says this, and it gets to, there's something bigger going on here than just a wine and wedding. That's the historical context. But Jesus is seeing something bigger because he has just launched out into his ministry career. And once Jesus is baptized and launches out into his ministry, he has a single focus. It is the will of God alone. And so in order for him to follow the will of God to the fullest, he has to set aside everything else in his life that pulls on him and requires his life and attention. And so he has set his gaze literally to the cross, to the climactic ending of the mission of God for him and for the world. And so here's his mother, who maybe has some responsibility at the wedding, comes to him in a panic. The wine has gone out. Now let's pause there. For the wine to go out in a Jewish wedding is a really bad thing. Because if you can think about it like this, if I were to invite you over to my house for brunch, and maybe let's say 50 of you show up, and I only make 1 pot of coffee, what would the comments? Thank you, Chris. He gets it. What would the comments be? What kind of idiot only makes 1 pot of coffee for 50 people at brunch with cinnamon rolls? That would be unthinkable. Take that and maximize it in a culture of honor and shame, where honor and shame is the air everyone breathes, which is how it was in this ancient world, in this Jewish context. What would be a complete social disaster and embarrassment is for the wine to run out at a wedding. And here's the deal. The groom in the Jewish wedding pays for and provides for the wine and the food. He's the financial backing for this party for all these people for up to a week. So it would be a huge social embarrassment and even shame to the groom and his whole family if there's no more wine. Which is why Mary is in a panic. And that's why she goes to Jesus. I don't know that what she was expecting. I don't think she was necessarily expecting Jesus to do a miracle. She's just going to her son, who is a resourceful kind of person, and saying, the wine has run out. I don't know what to do. What do we do? And so Jesus responds to her somewhat abruptly, what does this have to do with me? Now, I know still feel like you think Jesus is being rude. Do you still feel that a little bit? But he's not. He's looking at a larger landscape. And he is actually seeing this wedding as a symbol, as a sign. He's looking at this wedding as a parable of his own life as he's moving out into ministry and the bigger mission that he's on, so that he's saying, what does this small, ordinary celebration wedding have to do with me? I am literally thinking on a cosmic, universal scale right now. This is like an enacted parable. And the reason he's thinking that way is because the symbol of wedding and wine are woven all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures to describe something really important that Jesus is thinking about, and it's this idea, this phrase called new creation. In the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, when the prophets want to talk about new creation and the renewal of all things, two things come up often. Weddings, because God is going to unite to his people in that kind of love and fidelity that you see in a wedding. He's going to make a covenant with them, a new covenant, the book of Jeremiah calls it. Wedding and wine, all throughout the prophets, when the Bible wants to talk about, when the Old Testament prophets want to talk about what's going to come, when heaven and earth come together, when the renewal of all things happen, one of the things they'll mention is there's a lot of wine flowing. It's an abundance of wine. And if you don't believe me, just read the Old Testament. You can read the prophets, and you'll see them talking about when this wine is in abundance. That's a sign or a symbol of new creation. So Jesus is thinking on that scale. So Jesus said to her, woman, lady, lovely person, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come. See what he's doing there? When Jesus talks about his hour in the book of John, he's talking about something very specific. He's talking about when he will literally inaugurate the new covenant, new creation. And for the book of John and for Jesus, that happens at the cross. My hour has not yet come. So what do you want from me? It's not time yet. I can't open up the gates of the glory of the new covenant and new creation because it's not time yet. I still have work to do before the appointed time. So Mary's talking about this little wedding. Jesus is talking about the universe and the cosmic stakes that he is dealing with. Do you see what's happening here? So his mother says to the servants, do whatever he tells you. I love this. Mary's like, I wish I could have been there to kind of get the vibe here. It doesn't seem like Mary listens to him. She just turns to all the servants and says, whatever he says to do, do. I don't know if John is making it like this or not, but she is literally like the first preacher. She's like a preacher here. Isn't this what a preacher is supposed to do? Look at Jesus. Do whatever he says. End of sermon, And that's kind of what she's doing. Hey guys, listen up. We have a problem. This is Jesus. Do whatever he says. And she takes off. I don't know. We don't get much more than that, but I love it. So it says, now there were standing there 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. So you have these large stone water pots that were used for purification rites in the Jewish context. They had to wash their hands in a certain way. They had to, certain instruments and certain things they would use for serving food had to be washed in a certain way. And so Jesus initiates something regarding these water vats, massive water things that are used for purification rites. That's really important. So Jesus said to them, speaking to the servants, these are like the waiters and waitresses, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So that's kind of the person who's in charge of all the food happening. So they have to make sure everything's going on. It's like the head waiter kind of deal. So they took it, and when the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, remember, the bridegroom's the one who's responsible for all this. He's paying the bill. So he calls the bridegroom and he says to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine, after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Now Jesus did this as the first of signs in Cana of Galilee and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So, to close this all up, let me just try in the next 5 minutes to finish out what this, there's so much to this story. So, Jesus turns the water into wine, but nobody knows except two groups of people. Who are the people? The servants and the disciples. So those are only two groups of people. This is his first sign that John is zooming the light or pulling back the curtain so we can see the glory of Jesus. And isn't it interesting where John chooses to have the first sign take place? Or actually, more interesting, where doesn't he choose to have the first sign take place? If you're the writer and you're in a Jewish context, where would you choose to have the first sign take place? Because he's not doing this necessarily, all the signs aren't necessarily chronological in the book of John. He's kind of picking and choosing. So he chooses this one intentionally to be the first place in which Jesus' glory is revealed, and it's at a typical, normal Jewish wedding. Where do you think would be the most powerful, potent place he could have chosen to have Jesus' first sign done if you're thinking in a Jewish context? Where? Where's the big place? The temple. The temple is not, now that comes later, but the temple is not the first place, nor is it a palace. It's not in a temple, it's not in a palace, it's at a normal relational space where there's a celebration going on where Jesus' first sign is revealed. And I think that's really important. Also, it's helpful to note, Jesus is pointing toward, and John is pointing us toward these big vats of water. He goes to a little bit of pains to be very specific about them. How much they hold, how many there were, how filled up the water was filled to the very brim. Why is he making all these very specific statements about the water jars? Because what Jesus is doing here is bigger than just turning water into wine for one wedding ceremony. Remember, Jesus sees this as enacting a bigger parable about what his life is about. And that's where when you come to the book of John, you have to read the story, and then you have to read the symbol under which it's like telling us about the glory of Jesus. And what Jesus is actually doing, and what John is pointing to, is the old purification rites of the Jewish people are being replaced with something better. And this is what the gospel writers try to do over and over to show us that the old Mosaic system of the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures that was put in place is being replaced with a new covenant. And not just replaced, but reimagined. It's something better. And so here in this first sign, Jesus is pulling, the glory of Jesus is being pulled back, and we're seeing that Jesus has the authority and the power to renew the old broken down system that was put in place by Moses in the Hebrew Scriptures with something better, something more beautiful, something bigger. And so this is all happening in this incredible story. Now, I think it's important to note that in the ordinary life stuff of what's happening, there's two things that Jesus is pushing back on. If the wine had run out and Jesus hadn't done anything, there would have been great shame that was brought to the groom and his whole family. So you're dealing with shame and you're dealing with scarcity because there's not enough. Shame is that idea of that what we do, who we are, what we say, what we wear, how we act, it's never good enough. That's the shame. And scarcity is the reality that we never have enough. So you have these two human realities that Jesus, in an ordinary Jewish wedding, steps in and crushes on the spot. Shame and scarcity. Now that's really important because these two realities are realities that Jesus will continually crush by his power and glory. Shame that we are not enough. He says, welcome to my feast. Welcome to the table. And scarcity. Fill those pots to the brim. There's going to be so much wine, you're not going to know what to do with it. Because in God's kingdom, abundant generosity is for all. And so in this little picture, you have the very depth of our struggles that we as humans struggle with, shame and scarcity, and you have the person of Jesus walking into that and turning that shame into welcome and inclusion and unconditional love, and you have the scarcity and it's not enough, we don't have enough, becoming you have more than enough. The abundant generosity of God. So these two ideas are just pulsing through this story. Now, to close this, I just want to say, what are you supposed to do with this? I think we can enact new creation realities here and now by exchanging shame for welcome and acceptance and unconditional love, which we're going to do here in just a second at the table. This is one of the main features of the Lord's table of communion. I think we can enact new creation realities by cultivating ministry practices and postures of abundance and generosity. How can we experience abundance and generosity with everything about who we are as First Baptist Church? Our building, our resources, our space, our front porch, our endowments, yes, I said it, our rooms, our ministries. How can we take everything we have as First Baptist Church and posture toward abundance and generosity? That's the new creation way. Or let's make it personal. How can we posture and have practices in our home and our cars and our abilities and our experience and our stuff and our money and our talents and everything we have? How can we posture with abundance and generosity? That's how we enact new creation realities. And then the final thing is, how can we embrace this story of water to wine by allowing this story to be like a window opening up for us the glory of Jesus? And so I'll close with that. I think the question that should strike you in this story, maybe you've already asked it, is a little comment that was in parentheses that John points to. When the steward or the head waiter says to the bridegroom, this is the best wine. I mean, normally people, put the best wine up front, and then when people are a little bit, buzzed, now we can serve the box wine. Bring out the boxes, And it makes sense. And that's just kind of culturally how it worked. And so that's what was expected. But now, all of a sudden, midway through, you're bringing out the best stuff. You're bringing out the vintage. You're bringing out the wine that's blown. Like, whoa, this is amazing. And notice in the little comments, John says, the head waiter didn't know where it came from, but the servants knew. Did you see that little comment? And then at the end of the story it says, and the disciples saw this as a sign of his glory, and they believed in him. Now, this is the reality. This is where the heartbreak or the challenge comes. You had two groups of people who were witnesses to the glory of Christ, the servants and the disciples. Only the disciples, though, perceived in the sign the glory of who Jesus was. They saw what happened, and it was like for them, the curtain was pulled back, and they said, "Oh my word, the glory of Jesus, we just saw it." John 1 says, "We have seen the glory of the only Son coming from the Father." But he doesn't make the comment about the servants. So I think what he's pointing to is that the servants saw the sign, but they didn't see the glory. Does that make sense? They saw the working of Jesus, but there was no perception of his glory. The disciples saw the sign, and they saw the glory. So here's my prayer for you guys in 2026. My prayer, and for me, is that we would not just see the sign, but that we would perceive the glory of Jesus in this new year in ways we've never experienced it before. That we would not just see the work and sing the songs and do the things and attend the book clubs or the services or engage with the community, all these different things, but we would actually see the glory of Jesus so that in our hearts we would believe and that our faith would grow and be strengthened. That's not just my prayer for you, it's also my prayer for me. And so I would ask you to join us in this welcome of the new creation reality of Jesus by observing the table of Jesus with us this morning to close.